a door that opened itself, but only yesterday. Welcome to Mystery Tales. I am your host, Axon. Share the mystery vibe. Tell me where you're watching from. Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Now into the story. It was upon a particularly cold and wind-torn night in late November of 1895 that I first became acquainted with the singular matter of the door that opened yesterday, a matter so strange in its conception and so subtly bedevilled with deceit that even now I struggle to recount it without revisiting the uneasy sensations which accompanied its unfolding. I had returned to Baker Street earlier than usual that evening, my medical duties having ended a trifle sooner than expected. I pushed open the familiar door to find Sherlock Holmes standing in his dressing gown, silhouetted against the golden lamplight of our sitting room. His figure appeared tall and spectral through the swirling pipe smoke that clouded the air like a fog bank upon the Thames. Holmes was reading an open telegram with that peculiar intensity of expression, half amusement, half irritation, which heralded the approach of a problem worthy of his mind. "You seem disturbed, Holmes," I ventured, hanging up my coat. "Disturbed," he repeated, lifting an eyebrow. "No, Watson, merely entertained, though if the sender of this message is to be believed, Scotland Yard is half out of its wits." He passed me the telegram. It read, "Urgent. Request your immediate attendance. Stop locked room at Thorndyke Manor, opened in night. Stop, no sign of entry or exit. Stop, item of great value missing. Stop, fear. Foul play, stop. Lestrade." I looked up. "A locked room mystery?" "Just so," Holmes replied, clasping his hands behind him, "and one with a rather curious phrasing. The locked room opened in the night, as though possessed of volition." I could not help but smile. "You relish it already?" Holmes moved toward the hearth and tapped the ash from his pipe. "When Lestrade calls upon me at this hour, it is rarely for triviality. Thorndyke Manor, Watson. You may recall the name? Seat of the Thorndyke family for over a century, known for its valuable collection of antiquities." "Of course," I said. "I once read about Sir Percival Thorndyke's acquisitions in the British Museum Review." "Precisely. And it seems one of those acquisitions has vanished from behind a door that should not have opened, one secured by deadbolt, steel lock, and the rather troublesome fact that the only key remains in the pocket of the present Lord Thorndyke, who swears upon his ancestors that he did not rise from his bed." Holmes reached for his overcoat with a briskness that left no doubt. "We shall go at once, Watson. A crime committed under the guise of the impossible is invariably the most human in origin." The cab we hailed rattled through the London streets, cutting along the Strand and turning toward the quiet outskirts where the sprawling estates of the old families lay hidden under perpetual shrouds of mist. Holmes spoke little during the journey, though his eyes glittered with a subdued excitement I knew well. From time to time he would close them entirely, retreating somewhere into the recesses of thought. Only once did he speak, and then, as though resuming a conversation begun entirely in his own mind. "Doors, Watson," he said softly, "are the most unappreciated narrators. They creak, they resist, they betray the careless hand. A locked door is a proclamation. A door opened, when it ought not, speaks louder still." "And what do you suspect this one is proclaiming?" I asked. Without looking at me, Holmes replied, "That someone wishes us to believe in the impossible, which, as you well know, I never do." The remainder of the ride continued in silence. Thorndyke Manor loomed out of the fog like some slumbering monolith, its high stone walls dark and brooding, its windows gleaming faintly with the glow of lamplight within. A constable stood at the front entrance, stamping his feet to keep warm. Inside, the great hall was a cavernous, echoing space adorned with ancestral portraits, whose painted eyes followed our movements with stern disapproval. Waiting for us near the staircase was Inspector Lestrade, looking wind-blown and uncharacteristically pale. "Thank heavens you've come, Mr. Holmes," he said. "This business is beyond anything I've seen." Holmes shook his hand. "The room?" "This way," Lestrade replied grimly. We ascended the staircase and entered a long corridor lined with dark wooden doors. Halfway down it a cluster of anxious servants lingered, watched over by another constable. At the far end stood a tall gentleman in a velvet dressing-gown, Lord Adrian Thorndyke, the current master of the house. He stepped forward with a strained expression. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you must forgive the hour. I would not have disturbed you unless the matter were truly extraordinary." Holmes inclined his head. "Lead on, my lord." Lord Thorndyke guided us to a stout oak door reinforced with iron bands. The lock was heavy, the sort used for safes rather than interior rooms. Yet the door now hung open by a fraction, as though nudged by an unseen hand. "This room contains my grandfather's collection of rare manuscripts," Lord Thorndyke said. "Among them a 15th-century folio said to be worth more than half the estate." "And that item is missing?" Holmes asked. Lord Thorndyke nodded. "Gone. Yet this door was locked when I retired, and locked again when I awoke. The maid discovered it open at dawn." Holmes leaned forward and studied the lock with great interest. He examined the hinges, the threshold, the stone around the frame, each detail, receiving the full weight of his scrutiny. Without turning, he murmured, "And you swear you did not rise during the night?" "On my honour," Lord Thorndyke said. Holmes stepped inside the room. Its interior was immaculate, manuscripts in glass cases, artifacts arranged with near-obsessive precision. Only one case was open, the empty cradle where the folio once lay. But it was the floor that captured Holmes's attention. The Persian rug showed no footprints. The dust upon the cabinet tops lay unbroken. Holmes touched the open glass case. He said quietly. Lestrade looked frustrated. "We've searched every inch of the room, Mr. Holmes. No footprints outside the windows, no signs of forced entry. I can't make head nor tail of it." Holmes straightened and gave a faint, inscrutable smile. "Oh, but the room is not nearly as silent as you suppose, Inspector. It has whispered something already. I'm only waiting for it to speak again." And with that cryptic observation, Holmes turned and surveyed the corridor. "Watson," he said, "observe everything. We stand not at the end of a mystery, but rather at its opening threshold." Holmes remained a moment longer in the manuscript room, his gaze drifting from the vacant display case to the slightest irregularities in the pattern of dust upon the surrounding shelves. I watched him in silence, accustomed as I was to his habit of communing with the scene of a crime as though it were a living witness. When at last he emerged into the corridor, he moved with such purpose that both Lestrade and Lord Thorndyke straightened instinctively, as if bracing for a verdict. But Holmes rendered none. Instead, he drifted past us without comment, pausing only to close the heavy door gently. So gently it scarcely made a sound. He studied the lock once more, then stepped back several paces, and observed the frame as though contemplating the shape of an old friend whose features had subtly altered. "Lord Thorndyke," he said at length, "you mentioned that the maid discovered the room open at dawn. Might we speak with her?" "Of course," Thorndyke replied. "Lucy is downstairs with the other servants." "Then let us not tarry." Holmes turned sharply and strode toward the staircase. I followed with Lestrade at my side. The inspector gave a quiet huff of exasperation. "He saw something, Watson. I'll wager my last shilling on it." I murmured. "He always sees something." The great staircase creaked under our weight. At its base, The household staff waited in an uneasy cluster, their faces pale and drawn in the flickering candlelight. A stout elderly woman, likely the housekeeper, seemed to be holding them together more by force of will than authority. She dipped into a curtsy as Lord Thorndyke introduced us. "This is Lucy Holling," he said, steering forward a young maid with trembling hands and large, apprehensive eyes. She was the first to notice the door was ajar. Holmes addressed her in the gentlest tone I had heard him use in weeks. "Miss Holling, if you please, recount precisely what you saw." She twisted her apron nervously. "I came up the corridor to dust the banisters, sir. It would have been a few minutes past 6. The door to the manuscript room is always shut tight. Lord Thorndyke insists on it. But this morning it stood open just a crack, enough that the draught had pushed it wider." "A draught?" Holmes asked sharply. "Yes, sir. The window at the far end of the corridor has a loose fitting, and the wind rattles it sometimes." Holmes paced a few steps, then asked, "And you touched nothing? Entered nothing?" "No, sir. I ran to fetch Mrs. Groves at once." Holmes nodded. "Good. And tell me, did you pass anyone on the way? Hear anything unusual in the night? Footsteps? Voices?" "No, sir." Holmes seemed neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. He waved her gently back into the cluster of servants and turned to Lord Thorndyke. "Who has access to this corridor?" "Only myself, the housekeeper, and the 2 maids assigned to this wing," he answered. "The servants' rooms are on the opposite side of the manor." "And the key to the manuscript room?" Thorndyke patted the breast pocket of his dressing gown. "As I told you, Mr. Holmes, it never leaves my person." Holmes stepped closer. "May I see it?" Thorndyke produced the key. It was a heavy iron piece, thick enough to serve as a bludgeon, its teeth cut with unusual intricacy. Holmes took it, weighing it carefully. "A unique copy?" "Yes. It was forged specially when my grandfather built the collection room. There is no other." Holmes ran his fingertip along the teeth, then returned it with a slight bow. "Thank you. Now, Watson, Lestrade, back upstairs if you would be so kind." We returned to the corridor outside the locked room. Holmes approached the loose window at the end and pushed it open. A cold gust swept in, making the corridor lamps flicker. "Interesting," he murmured. Lestrade shuffled impatiently. "What is interesting, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes closed the window, then motioned to the rug beneath it. "Observe there. The corner of this runner is folded ever so slightly." I squinted. It was no more than a faint crease, easily attributed to careless vacuuming, had vacuuming existed in our day. "That draught earlier," Holmes continued, "would have lifted the rug only if the window were open long enough. Yet the maid described it as having a loose fitting, not one left ajar." Lestrade shrugged. "And this means—" "It means someone opened the window in the night," Holmes said. "For what purpose I cannot yet be certain." He walked past us again, returning to the door of the manuscript room. He knelt, producing a small magnifying lens from his pocket. "Note the metal."
"Along the lock's edge, Watson, what do you see?" I bent lower. "Scratches, fine ones, but they seem nearly invisible." "Precisely." Holmes rose. "Scratches too delicate for a common picklock. These were made by someone with intimate familiarity with fine instruments, someone accustomed to delicate manipulation." "Like a jeweler?" I offered. "Or a surgeon," Holmes remarked with a brief nod toward me. "Or possibly a clockmaker." He paused. "Yet none of those professions explain the absence of footprints or disturbances in the dust. A skilled hand has been at work, but not in the manner we first imagined." Lestrade scratched his head. "But what of Lord Thorndyke? If someone picked the lock, then the key is irrelevant." Holmes replied, "On the contrary, the key is central, for consider. Why pick a lock when the rightful key lies but a room away Unless, of course, retrieving that key required more risk than the picking itself. A faint tremor passed through the corridor, like the house itself bristling against the implications. Holmes turned and fixed his gaze upon a door opposite the manuscript room. "And what chamber is this?" Thorndyke, who had followed us back upstairs, answered somberly. "My late father's study. It has been locked since his death last year. I keep it closed out of respect." Holmes touched the handle lightly. Locked. Yes. Holmes gave a single nod. "Then if you permit, I should like to see inside." Thorndyke hesitated only a moment before producing another key, this one smaller and more ornate. The lock clicked softly and the door swung inward. We entered a dim, untouched study. Dust lay thick upon the desk, the curtains were drawn, an old grandfather clock stood silent in the corner. The air carried the stale heaviness of a room sealed away from life. Holmes moved toward the desk at once. Upon it lay a scattering of yellowed papers, a quill pen, and an ink pot long since dried. Holmes examined each with meticulous care before his attention shifted abruptly to the floor beneath the desk. He knelt again. "Watson," he said in a low voice, "have a look here." I bent beside him and saw what he indicated, a single thread, scarlet in colour, caught upon a splinter in the wood. The colour was vivid and out of place in the sombre room. Holmes pinched it delicately between his fingers. "Tell me, Lord Thorndyke, have any of your household worn garments of this shade recently?" Thorndyke frowned. "No, certainly none of the servants. Scarlet would violate the uniform." "Indeed," Holmes murmured. "And yet this thread is fresh. It has not lain here long." Lestrade leaned closer. "So someone has been in this room?" Holmes responded, "More than that. Someone was here very recently, no more than a day or two, someone with no permission to be." Thorndyke stared at the thread as though it were a poisonous serpent.
But why? This room contains nothing of value. Holmes turned the thread between his fingers. "Ah, my lord, value is a relative concept. What is worthless to one may be crucial to another." He slipped the thread carefully into his pocket and stood. "Watson, Lestrade, our thief has left us a most intriguing breadcrumb, and it leads us, I believe, to an individual who knows this house intimately." Thorndyke flinched. "You cannot mean—" Holmes raised a hand. "Say nothing yet. There is much still concealed beneath the surface, but rest assured, the door that opened yesterday is only the beginning." Holmes lingered in the late Lord Thorndyke's study longer than any of us expected, his sharp eyes absorbing every detail, while his fingers traced the edges of drawers, the grooves in the wooden floor, the dust patterns upon the mantel. The single thread of scarlet had awakened something in him, a shift in his bearing, subtle but unmistakable, as though the house itself had whispered a truth only he could hear. I had seen such transformations before. They announced the moment when Holmes's mind began weaving the first faint strands of understanding into a pattern. At last he stood and faced Lord Thorndyke, with an expression neither accusatory nor reassuring, but something far more unsettling. Deep curiosity. "My lord," he said quietly, "when was the last time this room was opened?" Thorndyke swallowed, clearly still unnerved. "Not since my father's passing. That was in March." "Locked consistently? No one else possessed a key?" "No one," he insisted. "I keep it among my private effects." Holmes nodded, though his eyes did not leave Thorndyke's face. "And yet someone entered here within recent days." He paced slowly around the room, running his hand along the back of a leather armchair. To disturb a sealed study implies motive. To leave behind a thread implies haste. To connect their intrusion with last night's disappearance, however, that requires a far more delicate hand. Lestrade, always eager for conclusions, pressed forward. "Are you saying, Mr. Holmes, that the same person who stole the folio was rummaging through this room earlier?" Holmes gave a soft, humourless laugh. "My dear Lestrade, if I intended to say that, I should have said it. The evidence suggests a connection, yes, but the nature of that connection is far from established. One might come here seeking inspiration, information, or—" He paused, studying Lord Thorndyke carefully. "Something hidden." Thorndyke's face flushed at the suggestion, though whether from indignation or fear I could not say. Holmes seemed to sense the rising tension and waved it aside. "We shall not rummage through your family's private documents without reason, but understand this. Whoever entered this room did so knowing it was forbidden. That speaks to either familiarity with the household or an intruder."
With exceptional audacity, he stepped back into the corridor, and we followed. The window at the far end rattled again, as if punctuating his words. Holmes stood facing it for several seconds, hands clasped behind his back. "The open window," he murmured, "the disturbed rug, the scratches on the lock, the missing manuscript, and now this thread. Our adversary is methodical but not flawless. They wish to create the illusion of an impossible crime, but like all illusions, the seams betray the magician." I asked gently, "Do you believe the thief is still inside the manor?" Holmes turned to me, the faintest gleam in his eyes. "An enticing possibility, Watson, but unlikely. I suspect they left before dawn, though not by the corridor." He glanced down. "The absence of footprints tells us that much." Lestrade threw up his hands. "Then how in blazes did they get in or out? There's no other entrance to the room." Holmes lifted a finger. "Correction. None that you have observed." We accompanied him back into the manuscript room. Holmes walked directly to the far wall, where several tall bookcases stood flush against the stone. He examined the floorboards beneath them, the moulding, the slight irregularity in the alignment of one cabinet. "Watson," he said softly, "lend me your strength for a moment." At his gesture, I positioned myself beside him at the largest of the bookcases. At his count, we pressed against its side. It shifted slightly, no more than an inch, but I felt the frame give beneath our weight. Holmes stepped back, eyes gleaming. "Just as I suspected," Thorndyke gasped. "Good heavens, are you implying—" "That this bookcase is not fixed," Holmes said. "See here, the scuff marks on the floor. Someone has moved it recently. And note the faint difference in dust accumulation on the left side versus the right." Lestrade bent close, squinting. "I'll be—" "He's right. Someone dragged it aside." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, but the question remains, why?" He reached for the top shelf and removed a book, an atlas, old and worn. Behind it, where the backing of the case should have been solid, there instead lay a narrow vertical slit. Holmes widened it gently with his fingers, revealing a hidden cavity. Lord Thorndyke staggered backward. "I had no idea." "It is likely older than your father," Holmes said. "Such recesses were common in manor houses of the last century. Some held valuables, others documents, or more sinister things." He inspected the cavity. "Empty. Our thief knew of it or discovered it." Lestrade's face lit with triumph. "So they hid the folio there, then retrieved it later?" Holmes shook his head. "No, the cavity is too shallow for a manuscript of that size. And look closely. There are scratch marks within, claw-like, irregular, not consistent with a smooth object placed or removed." I peered in as well. "The stone!"
Bore marks suggesting something thin had been inserted repeatedly, not a valuable artifact, but perhaps a tool, or a search. Holmes stood in silence, processing the implications. Then, in a low tone, he said, "Someone was not hiding something here. They were looking for something." Thorndyke's voice cracked. "Looking for what?" Holmes turned to him. "That, my lord, is the question upon which this entire case may rest." Before Thorndyke could reply, a sudden clatter echoed from downstairs, a metallic crash accompanied by a startled shout. Lestrade tensed at once. "What the devil was that?" Holmes's expression sharpened. "We shall find out quickly, Watson. Come." We descended as swiftly as decorum allowed. At the bottom of the stair, 2 constables were already hurrying toward the source of the commotion, the service corridor leading to the kitchens. The housekeeper emerged from that direction, her face white as flour. "What happened?" Lestrade barked. She wrung her hands. "It's Mrs. Lydia, sir, the seamstress. She fainted dead away, said she saw a figure outside the scullery window." "A figure?" I repeated. "At this hour?" Holmes was already moving toward the rear of the manor. The scullery was dim, lit by only a single lantern. A young woman lay slumped in a chair, her breathing shallow but steady. Holmes did not pause. He went straight to the window, examining the latch, the sill, the iron bars embedded into the masonry. He opened the window outward. Cold air rushed in. On the ground outside were faint impressions, not footprints exactly, but scuffing in the gravel. Lestrade knelt beside them. "Could be anyone." "On the contrary," Holmes murmured. "These marks align precisely with the width of a man's boot, though intentionally blurred. Someone stood here only minutes ago." Thorndyke appeared behind us, breathless. "Then the thief, is near," Holmes said. His voice was cool, alert. "Closer than any of us suspected." We waited in tense silence, staring into the darkness beyond the window. The fog roiled like a living thing. Somewhere in that grey curtain, unseen eyes had watched us. Holmes closed the window deliberately. "Our adversary has grown bold. They wished to ensure something, or someone, remained undisturbed, but their timing betrays unease." Lestrade growled. "We should send constables to search the grounds." Holmes shook his head. "Do so, but they will find nothing. Our visitor has already departed." He turned back toward the corridor, his pace quickening. "Yet their presence informs us of one critical truth." I hurried at his side. "And what is that, Holmes?" "That the mystery of the missing folio is not confined to last night's events alone," he said. "We are facing a plot long in motion and still unfolding." As he ascended the stairs once more, I felt the air shift around us, heavy with the weight of revelations yet to come. The manor's ancient walls seemed to listen, as though anticipating the secrets Holmes was now determined to uncover. Holmes did not return to the manuscript room as I had expected. Instead, he turned at once toward the servants' wing, moving with that quick, intent step which told me his mind had seized on some new connection. I followed with Lestrade and Lord Thorndyke, the gas lamps flickering as we passed. Mrs. Lydia, the seamstress, had been carried to a small sitting room off the kitchen. She was now revived with a little brandy, though her hands still twisted at her apron and her eyes kept flitting toward the door. The housekeeper hovered beside her in anxious protection. Holmes's manner when he chose could be as gentle as any physician's. He bowed slightly. "Mrs. Lydia, you have been startled, but you are in no danger now. I must ask you to recall what you saw. The smallest detail may be of value." She swallowed, looking from him to Lord Thorndyke. "I'll try, sir." "You were in the scullery?" Holmes prompted. "Yes, sir. I went to look to the linens in the tub. When I straightened up, I saw him at the window, right against the glass, like." "Describe him, if you please." "Tall," she said slowly. "Not stooped like an old man. Wrapped in a dark coat. I couldn't see his face clear. The lantern was behind me. But I saw his eyes. They were set right on mine, sharp-like. And there was something red at his neck. A scarf or such. It shone when he turned, so I think it was silk. Holmes's glance met mine for a fraction of a second. I thought at once of the scarlet thread he had discovered in the late Lord's study. "Red," he repeated. "Bright?" "Oh, yes, sir. Not dull at all. And his hands—" She stopped, frowning as she searched her memory. They weren't gloved, white like a gentleman's, not rough like the groom's hands. "And what did he do when he realized you had seen him?" "He started back like he'd not expected anyone," she answered. "Then he turned sharp and was gone into the fog. I screamed, and Mrs. Groves came running." Holmes nodded. "Have you ever seen a man of that build about the place before?" She hesitated. "I can't be sure. Maybe from afar. He walked like someone used to giving orders, if you understand me, sir. But I don't rightly watch the quality clothes." "You have been very clear," Holmes said, in a tone of genuine approval. "You may rest. I do not think our watcher will come again by that window." As we stepped back into the passage, I murmured, "The red silk, Holmes. It must connect with the thread in the study." "It must do nothing of the kind," he replied, though not unkindly. "We note the parallel and wait to see whether it truly binds. Premature conclusions are the curse of the detective mind, Watson. They blind one to the unexpected fact." Lestrade, less cautious, said, "Still a tall man with a red scarf prowling the ground sounds like a gentleman gone very much astray." "Or someone dressed to resemble one," Holmes answered. "Tell me, Lord Thorndyke, who of your guests or household might answer to such a description?" Thorndyke tugged at his moustache with an air of discomfort. "My cousin, Edward Markham, is staying with us. He arrived yesterday afternoon. There is also Miss Clara Finch, my late mother's companion. No other persons of rank sleep under this roof tonight." "And Mr. Markham?" Holmes asked. "What is his relation to you in a legal sense?" "He is my nearest male kinsman," Thorndyke admitted. "Should I die without heir, certain entailed portions of the estate would pass to him, but I will not have it supposed that Edward—" Holmes raised a hand. "We suppose nothing. We only record that he exists, that he arrived on the eve of the crime, and that he might profit indirectly by your misfortune. I should like to speak with him. A footman will find him, if you please. Afterwards, I must see Miss Finch." We were shown to a smaller drawing-room whose fire did its best to push back the damp and fog pressing at the panes. Holmes took up his familiar position on the hearthrug, hands behind his back, eyes half closed. I knew that he was arranging the facts as a chess player sets his pieces before the true contest begins. The door opened presently, and a man entered with the easy self-possession of one long accustomed to good society. He was perhaps 35, well set up, with dark hair brushed back from a high brow, and a neatly trimmed moustache. His manner was courteous without warmth, but it was the splash of colour at his throat which seized the eye. Around his neck was knotted a scarf of vivid scarlet silk. "Mr. Edward Markham," Lord Thorndyke said. "My cousin. Edward, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, and Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard." Markham bowed with practised grace. "I know of you by repute, Mr. Holmes. I confess I did not expect to find you at Thorndyke Manor, though the loss Adrian has suffered is grave enough to summon the very best." "You take a keen interest in your cousin's misfortune," Holmes observed. "As any decent man would," Markham replied. "The folio is a family treasure. Do you have hope of recovering it?" "That depends upon whether those within these walls choose to be perfectly frank with me," Holmes said. "You arrived yesterday, I understand?" "By the 5 o'clock train from London," Markham answered promptly. "I walked from the station to the inn, sent a telegram to my clerk, and came straight here." "And your movements last night between dinner and morning?" "We dined at 7, he said." Afterwards, Adrian and I played 2 games of chess in the library. I retired a little after 11 and slept soundly until the uproar this morning. My man, Hawkins, sleeps in the adjoining room. He can tell you that I did not leave my chamber." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. We were given adjoining rooms on the first floor. I was tired from the long day, yet my mind still buzzed with the puzzle of the open door and the vanished folio. Holmes, who never seemed to know fatigue when confronted with an intricate case, paced my chamber once, noting the position of window, door, and the crack beneath it, through which a faint band of light from the corridor was visible. "This will do," he said. "From that chair with the lamp turned low, I can watch the shadow of anyone who passes along the landing. Our friend has used the bookcase once already tonight. If he means to alter or recover anything, he must return." "You expect him to come back?" I asked, unfastening my collar. "I do," Holmes replied. "We have disturbed the pattern. Men who build such patterns do not sit idle when they feel them shifting. You, Watson, will go to bed. A door opened by a man who believes himself unobserved is worth 10 opened under the eye of a constable." I attempted to insist that I share his vigil, but he cut me short with that quiet decision which I knew better than to oppose. Removing coat and boots, I lay down upon the bed. The last thing I remember before sleep claimed me was Holmes in the armchair by the hearth, his long legs stretched before him, his gaze fixed on the slit of light by the door. I awoke suddenly, without knowing why, in the grey hush of the small hours. The fire had fallen low, the room felt colder. "Listen," he whispered. From the corridor came a faint sound, a slow, dragging scrape, like heavy wood moving over boards. It came once, paused, then came again, followed by a soft thud. "Our man," Holmes breathed. "No boots, Watson. We cannot creak like a pair of grenadiers." We crossed the room in our stockinged feet. Holmes turned the handle with extreme care, and we slipped into the dim passage. From the hall below, I heard the great clock ticking, but otherwise the house lay in complete silence. Holmes glanced first over the balustrade, then toward the bend where the door to the servants' stair was set. The door of the manuscript room was shut. He laid his fingertips lightly on the brass handle. "Still warm," he murmured. "He has but just left it. We will not spoil his sense of safety by bursting in at once." He drew me back into a shallow recess where a high-backed settle stood. From there, by leaning forward, we could see the corner of the corridor and the servants' door. After a short interval, a figure appeared, coming from the direction of the manuscript room. He moved close to the wall. In that poor light I could only make out that he was spare and above middle height. There seemed to be some darker fold at his throat, but I could not distinguish colour. He paused once, listening, then slipped through the servants' door and was gone. "You see?" Holmes whispered. "He knows the house well enough to shun the main stair. A casual thief might blunder either way. This man chooses the path where he is least likely to meet lord or guest. You are sure, then, that he is not some stranger from outside?" "Not sure," Holmes replied, "but increasingly doubtful. Let us see what he has been doing, now that he believes himself unseen." Only when the last faint creak from below had died did we approach the manuscript room. The door opened easily. Within, the lamps were as we had left them, but there was a subtle air of recent disturbance, as if the room itself were listening. Holmes went straight to the great bookcase. The carpet in front of it showed a new ridge where heavy weight had dragged it. On the nearest shelf, the dust bore a fresh smear, as if a sleeve had brushed it. "He has been here again," Holmes said, "and not with a light heart." Together we drew the case aside. The scraping sound answered exactly to what we had heard from the bedroom. Behind, the narrow recess yawned in the stone. Holmes knelt and held the lamp close, exploring with long, sensitive fingers. For some moments he said nothing. Then he gave a small exclamation and drew out a tiny, round object. It was a tarnished metal disc pierced near the rim. Much of the engraving had gone, but 3 characters were still faintly visible. "T.M.," I read. "The last letter is imperfect." "Enough to tell us that someone linked with those initials has played some part in this matter," said Holmes, "whether it is the owner, the maker, or merely the subject of our thief's interest we cannot yet say. But our visitor has searched for this very piece more than once, and tonight he has missed it by minutes." "You will show it to Lord Thorndyke?" I asked. "In time," Holmes answered, slipping the token into his pocket. "For the moment it is more valuable to us than to him. A man acts differently when he believes a clue still buried in stone. Let him think so a little longer. His next move will be the more revealing." We replaced the bookcase and smoothed the carpet. When all was as nearly as possible restored, we withdrew to my room. Holmes resumed his post in the chair, as calm as if nothing had occurred. "Sleep, Watson," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we shall look more narrowly at certain faces in this house. Our friend of the hidden recess believes himself unseen. That belief will not endure the daylight." I lay down once more. In spite of the excitement of our midnight excursion, my fatigue soon overcame me, and I drifted again into uneasy slumber, with the faint sound of scraping wood and the image of that small, mysterious disc lingering in my mind. I woke with the dull ache behind the eyes which follows broken sleep. The fire was a faint glow in the grate, and light seeped round the curtain. Holmes, still in the armchair where I had last seen him, turned his head at once. "You have had more rest than I," he said. "I shall need you." "You have not been to bed," I remarked. "Beds are plentiful. Problems of this quality are not." He drew from his pocket the small metal disc we had taken from the recess and laid it on the washstand. In the cold light, the worn engraving was plain. "T.M. Last night," he went on, "you half whispered Thorndyke Manor to yourself. You see now that you were wrong. These are a man's initials. Our visitor in the corridor has risked too much for me to doubt that this trifle is of consequence to him." A short while later, we went down to breakfast. The household had the strained, subdued air of people who had slept with one ear open. Lord Thorndyke rose as we entered. The lines in his face seemed deeper than the previous night. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he burst out, "is the business any clearer this morning?" "We stumble less than yesterday," Holmes replied. "I can at least tell you that the security of your manuscript room is more apparent than real. The great bookcase covers a recess in the wall, and someone has been shifting it with some industry." Thorndyke stared. "A recess? I swear I knew nothing of it." "I am inclined to believe you," said Holmes. "Your late father had, I fancy, a taste for hiding places. Tell me, do the initials T.M. recall any person connected with this house?" He set the disc by Thorndyke's plate. The other bent over it, frowning. "My grandfather was Thomas Markham Thorndyke," he said slowly. "But he always used all 3 letters. My father had a friend when he was young, a Timothy Marsh. I know nothing of him beyond the name. There was some quarrel, I believe." "Timothy Marsh," Holmes repeated. "And you have not heard of him for many years?" "Not in my time," said Thorndyke. "Yet his name lies close against this affair," Holmes murmured. "We shall see how tightly it is bound." As Holmes spoke, Edward Markham came in, a trifle late, and went to the sideboard. The vivid scarf of the previous evening had been replaced by a sober tie, yet I could not forget the flash of scarlet Mrs. Lydia had described at the scullery window. "You slept, Mr. Markham?" Holmes asked pleasantly. "After a fashion," Markham replied. "I do not think anyone in the house slept well." "We heard something moved on the upper corridor," said Holmes, "a heavy object scraping on boards. Did it disturb you?" Markham shook his head. "Old houses complain in their sleep, Mr. Holmes. I heard nothing which tempted me from my room." "Your man can confirm that?" Holmes asked, very quietly. "He can," said Markham at once. Holmes merely nodded and returned to his coffee, but I recognized the little stillness in him which meant that an answer had been marked, weighed, and set aside for later comparison. When the meal was over, Lord Thorndyke introduced us to Miss Clara Finch. She entered with quiet composure, a slight young woman in grey, her dark hair plainly arranged, her manner reserved yet assured. "You were companion to the late Lady Thorndyke," Holmes began. "For 6 years," she replied. "After her death I remained, by Lord Thorndyke's wish, to assist in ordering her papers." "What papers?" he asked. "Her correspondence, chiefly," said Miss Finch. "Letters from relatives and a few older friends. One gentleman's name recurs often in the earlier packets, a Mr. Timothy Marsh. Her ladyship spoke of him sometimes." "Once more our friend T.M., Holmes murmured. "You are sure of the name?" "Quite sure. I gathered that he and Sir Percival had once been close. There was some quarrel. After that the letters became fewer, but she kept them." "And where are these letters now?" Holmes said. "In Sir Percival's study, in the right-hand drawer of his desk," she answered. "One further question, Miss Finch," he added. "In dealing with those papers and keepsakes, have you ever seen a small metal disc engraved with the letters T.M.? She considered. "No, I do not recall anything of that kind. There are many trifles, but none with initials." "You have been very helpful," Holmes said. "That will suffice for the present." As the door closed behind her, Holmes turned to Lord Thorndyke. "If you will allow us another look at your father's study, my lord, Mr. Timothy Marsh may come a little nearer." In the study, Holmes went straight to the drawer Miss Finch had named and drew out bundles of letters, sorting them until he found a packet addressed, in a firm hand, "To Lady Elizabeth Thorndyke, from Timothy Marsh." He opened the top letter, read it, then placed it in my hand, his finger, on a passage. "Oh, you know that the folio was pledged to me in return for services rendered your husband. I have forborne to press my claim, yet I cannot surrender a right so dearly earned. Should he forget what was promised, there remain other ways in which such matters may be adjusted." "Then Marsh believed himself entitled to the manuscript," I said. "Or wished that belief never to fade," Holmes answered. "The date, 15 years ago. Other letters strike the same note, grievance and pressure. No reconciliation." "Then this theft may be the working out of that old threat," I suggested. "It may," said Holmes, "but Marsh himself, if he lives, would now be old, and the man we saw was not. We must look for a younger hand using an older claim. A scheme nursed for years will not bear interference. Before this day ends, our unseen friend will be driven into haste, and in haste even clever fingers slip." Holmes replaced the bundle of letters with his customary care, tying the string in the same careless loop in which he had found it. Only the topmost sheet he shifted half an inch to one side so that the name Timothy Marsh lay exposed. "A bait?" I suggested. "A mirror," he replied. "We shall see whose conscience flinches from its own reflection. Come, Watson. There are still 2 shadows in this house we have only half examined, Mr. Edward Markham and his man." We found Lestrade in the hall with a constable. "You have a notebook full of statements, no doubt," said Holmes. Add one more. I should like Mr. Markham's valet, Hawkins, in the small parlour at once. Then remain near the door, but do not intrude unless I call. Hawkins presented himself a few minutes later, a neat, pale fellow with the deferential air of a trained servant. You attended upon Mr. Markham last night? Holmes began. Yes, sir. I laid out his things and answered the bell when he was ready to retire. At what hour was that? A little after 11, sir. My master went to bed straight from the library. And did you remain within hearing of his room? I did, sir. I sleep in the dressing-room between his chamber and the passage. Holmes regarded him. You are a heavy sleeper, Hawkins? Hawkins coloured. No, sir. Very light. I'm often woken by the clock in the corridor. So if your master had left his room in the night, you would have known it? I should, sir. But he did not. I heard nothing, not so much as a floorboard. Holmes leaned forward. You are certain you heard nothing at all? No dragging sound, no creak from the boards above? The man hesitated. Now that you speak of it, sir, I did hear something queer, a sort of muffled scrape as if a big piece of furniture was being shifted, but it was from higher up, from the other corridor. I thought it was just the constables, or maybe the housemaids moving something they oughtn't, so I put a pillow over my head. At what time was this? Holmes asked quickly. I couldn't say exact, sir, perhaps 2 o'clock. I dropped off and then woke with it. Holmes shot me a glance. The hour tallied with our own nocturnal observation. One last question, he said. Where were you before you entered Mr. Markham's service? In the employ of Mr. Marsh, sir, Mr. Timothy Marsh of Bloomsbury. I was with him 8 years, until he died last spring. You left on good terms? Yes, sir. Mr. Marsh left me a reference and a small legacy. After his death I came to Mr. Markham, who had been acquainted with him through business. What business? I don't know the particulars, sir. Papers and such. Mr. Marsh saw many gentlemen. I was just the valet. Holmes nodded. You may go, Hawkins, but I advise you for your own sake to be very precise in anything you tell Inspector Lestrade here. Inaccuracies in such matters are apt to prove unhealthy. When the man had gone, Lestrade burst out. There you have it, Mr. Holmes, the old claimant's servant now with the cousin, who'd profit by the estate, both under the roof the very night the folio vanishes. If that isn't conspiracy, I'll eat my hat. A pattern, certainly, Holmes said, but whether woven by them or merely wrapped around them by another hand, we have yet to see. Do not arrest anyone at present, Inspector. A premature hand upon the collar might scare off the one man we truly need. And who is that? I asked. The man who stood outside the scullery window, Holmes replied. He may be Markham, or Marsh's emissary, or some third party trading on both their names. Until I know which, I prefer my birds on the lawn to scattered in the hedgerows. Holmes spent the day between the manuscript room and the library, examining land records and account books supplied by Lord Thorndyke. Shortly after 4, he announced, The time has come to disturb the hive, Watson. We shall see which bees fly first. In the drawing-room, Lord Thorndyke, Miss Finch, Markham, and Lestrade were assembled. Holmes took up a place by the mantelpiece. I have asked you all here, he said, because the situation has altered. Certain letters of Sir Percival Thorndyke, bearing directly on the disputed folio and the claims of Mr. Timothy Marsh, have come to light. I have advised Lord Thorndyke that these letters, together with all papers relating to the transaction, must be placed at once in the hands of the family solicitors in London. A special messenger will leave the house within the hour. Hawkins, who was laying coal on the fire, half turned his head. It is my opinion, Holmes continued, in a tone that to my ear rang a shade too loud, that the theft last night was less an attempt to secure the folio itself than to destroy or obtain evidence connected with its prior ownership. Whoever is responsible will be anxious, desperately anxious, to prevent those letters reaching safekeeping. Lord Thorndyke stirred. Miss Finch's fingers tightened on her embroidery. Markham stood straight, his eyes fixed on the carpet. "At 6 o'clock, Holmes went on, a sealed packet will be sent from this house to the station in charge of a single rider. Lestrade, you will see that 2 of your men accompany him at a distance. I do not expect them to be needed." "Then why send them?" Markham asked. "Because, Mr. Markham," said Holmes softly, "I very much hope that before that packet reaches the train someone will have tried to tamper with it." He smiled then, the faint, cold smile I had seen more than once when he set a snare. Though I could not yet see the shape of his design, I knew that, for my own part, the real contest had begun. Holmes's announcement settled over the room like a shifting pressure in the air, one that every person present felt, but none fully understood. Even Lestrade, who prided himself on straightforward conclusions, appeared uncertain whether Holmes intended to provoke or protect. Markham's gaze remained fixed on the floorboards, yet I sensed a tension in the set of his shoulders, as though some inner calculation had begun to race behind his stillness. Miss Finch watched Holmes with quiet intensity, while Lord Thorndyke's expression vacillated between alarm and appeal. When Holmes finished, he made a slight gesture toward I. "Watson, come," he said softly, and stepped from the room with the ease of a man who knew his words would ferment in every mind the moment he departed. I joined him at the foot of the stairs. "Holmes," I whispered, "you spoke of solicitors, messengers, and letters. Will there truly be such a packet?" Holmes gave a faint, pleased smile. "I have found, Watson, that nothing draws out a lurking adversary more effectively than the knowledge that time is turning against him. Whether he wishes the folio for gain or those letters for destruction, he cannot risk the documents reaching London. And if he believes he must act before 6 o'clock, then act he shall." "You mean to trap him?" I said. "I mean to offer him an irresistible opportunity, and observe what use he makes of it." He paused as a footman passed through the hall, then added in a lower tone, "Now we must let the house simmer. Our quarry cannot help revealing himself when pressure and uncertainty pull at him from opposite sides." Holmes returned to the manuscript room, where the afternoon light fell in long, golden bars across the floor. He examined again the faint scuffing near the bookcase, the slight shift in the carpet's edge, and the dust at the recess. Though all had been restored to its earlier semblance, he studied the room as though expecting it to whisper fresh clues. "There is one pattern I cannot yet reconcile," he murmured, half to himself. "Our intruder searches the recess twice, a great personal risk, yet what he sought was not there. What convinced him to return? What change occurred? And why did he not search the study? He entered it once, we know, but never again. Perhaps he feared Lord Thorndyke might return unexpectedly," I offered. Holmes shook his head. "He fears discovery, undoubtedly, but he fears something else still more, being too late." At that moment Lestrade entered, rubbing his hands. "Your rider's ready, Mr. Holmes. I've 2 men stationed by the stables as ordered. We'll see if anyone tries to meddle with your packet." Holmes nodded. "Excellent. See that no one leaves the grounds between now and 6. Save the messenger when the hour comes." Lestrade departed with determination, boots ringing on the stone. The minutes passed slowly. Thorndyke sent word that tea awaited in the drawing-room, but Holmes refused, preferring to remain in the corridor where he could watch the household move. The servants bustled about, more tensely than usual, and the constable's presence filled the old manor with restless energy. Edward Markham appeared once in the corridor, gave Holmes a stiff nod, then retreated toward the library. Hawkins passed twice carrying linens, his face blank save for the slightest flicker of discomfort when he glanced our way. Miss Finch walked by with embroidery in hand, her steps measured and composed. Holmes watched each of them with the calm patience of a naturalist, observing the movements of creatures in their habitat. At last, the long case clock in the hall chimed the quarter hour before 6. Holmes straightened. "We begin now." A footman arrived carrying a long sealed envelope, the wax still warm. "For the solicitor, sir," he said, presenting it to Holmes. Holmes inspected the seal, handed it back. "Good. Take it to the stables. The rider is to depart when the clock strikes." The footman bowed and hurried off. Holmes waited until he was out of sight, then looked to me. "Walk with me, Watson, not swiftly, but as men without purpose. Allow our presence to be seen." We descended the stairs, took a leisurely turn through the great hall, and paused near the entrance to the servants' wing. Holmes's head tilted slightly. "Do you hear it?" he murmured. I listened. The faintest clatter echoed, metal against stone, a muffled, hurried sound. Footsteps, then a pause. They were not coming toward us, but rather moving away toward the rear passage that led to the gardens and the stables. Holmes nodded once. "He's making his move." We hastened silently down the corridor, passing the scullery where Mrs. Lydia had glimpsed the figure the night before. The outer door stood ajar. Holmes moved to the threshold and peered out. The fog had begun to descend again in soft, rolling sheets across the lawns. A figure in a dark coat hurried along the side path toward the stables, not running, but walking with the purposeful speed of someone who did not wish to draw notice yet had little time to spare. The red scarf at his throat caught a stray beam of waning light. "Markham," I whispered. "Not so hasty," Holmes said quietly. "Observe the gait." I looked again. The figure's steps were quick, yes, but there was a slight stiffness, perhaps a habitual pause in the right leg, that did not match Markham's smooth, confident stride. "That is Hawkins," Holmes concluded. "He was with Marsh for years. He knows the old man's grievances, perhaps even shared them. If he believes the letters will expose him or his master, he would take desperate measures to seize them." Lestrade appeared beside us, suddenly breathless. "One of the horses is saddled, Holmes. They say the rider's almost ready." "Then come," Holmes said crisply. "Your quarry is already upon the path." We hastened across the lawn, keeping to the shadows of the hedges. Hawkins glanced back once, but the fog cloaked us. At the stables he slipped inside, and a moment later a startled shout reached us, the voice of the rider. Lestrade drew his revolver. "By thunder! I knew it!" Holmes seized his arm. "No firearms, Inspector, not unless forced. Let us end this cleanly." Inside the stable, the messenger was struggling on the ground, Hawkins atop him. The valet had torn the envelope half from the rider's coat before Holmes wrenched him backward with surprising strength, pinning his arms behind him. Hawkins fought wildly. "Let me go! You don't understand. That packet cannot leave this house." "Indeed it will not," Holmes said calmly, "for there is nothing of value inside it." The man froze. Holmes held up the envelope, in perfect condition, plucked from the messenger's belt. "This is a duplicate. The true contents are elsewhere." Hawkins stared, breathing hard. "You tricked me." Holmes's voice softened. "No, you tricked yourself. All I did was give you a deadline." The man's shoulders sagged. A lifetime of civility and secrecy seemed to collapse upon him at once. "It wasn't Markham," he whispered. "It never was. He only wanted what he was owed. But Marsh was wronged. Sir Percival cheated him, and when he died, I swore—" "You swore to reclaim the folio," Holmes finished, "or destroy the evidence of Marsh's claim." Hawkins nodded miserably. The old master left me nothing but that legacy. I thought I could put things right for him, for myself." "And the man at the scullery window?" I asked. Hawkins hesitated. "I meant only to see if the household slept. I wore a scarf of my old master's, a foolish, sentimental thing. When the maid screamed, I fled." Holmes tightened his grip. "And the folio? Where is it?" "In the recess," Hawkins said. "Behind the bookcase. I hid it there before dawn." Holmes exhaled, a quiet note of satisfaction. "Then this matter is nearly concluded." Lestrade bound Hawkins's wrists. The man gave no resistance. Holmes turned to me as we stepped back into the fading light. "Observe, Watson, our adversary was not the heir, nor the scholar, nor the master of the house, but the man who stood invisibly behind them all. Loyalty, when warped by resentment, is a most dangerous thing." "And the folio?" I asked. "Will it be intact?" "Yes," Holmes answered. "He never meant to profit by it, only to fulfill a dead man's grievance." As we walked toward the manor, the fog thickening around us, Holmes added, "Yet this story is not entirely closed. We must still unwind the web that allowed such deception to root itself in this house. The letters, the quarrel, the old hidden recess, all speak to a deeper history." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Holmes slowed. "I have one final thread to follow, Watson. When I pull it, the last mask will fall." And though the manor loomed reassuringly ahead, I could not shake the sense that the deepest secret of Thorndyke Manor had yet to be revealed. Holmes handed Hawkins over to Lestrade with a few curt directions, then turned immediately back toward the house. Lord Thorndyke was waiting in the hall, his face drawn and anxious. Miss Finch stood a little apart, her sewing basket dangling unused from her hand. Edward Markham leaned by the fireplace, his expression outwardly calm, but the rigid set of his jaw betrayed him. "Well?" Thorndyke cried. "Have you caught the scoundrel? Is it finished?" "We have the man who laid hands upon your property," Holmes said. "Whether we have yet accounted for every intelligence concerned in the matter is another question. For the present, my lord, our first task is to see whether your folio lies where Hawkins claims it does." "The folio!" Thorndyke exclaimed. "You know where it is?" "Hawkins asserts that he concealed it behind the large bookcase in your manuscript room," Holmes replied. "We shall put him to the test at once. Inspector, bring your prisoner." Lestrade appeared with Hawkins between two constables. The valet's shoulders drooped. The stubbornness I had seen in him earlier seemed to have burnt itself out, leaving only a kind of weary despair. We mounted the stairs and entered the manuscript room. The ordered ranks of books, the glass cases, and the faint odour of leather and paper were just as before, yet, to me, the whole place now wore an air of subtle treachery, as though it had connived at the crime. Holmes pointed to the largest bookcase. "You know your way, Hawkins. Show us." Hawkins hesitated a heartbeat, then shuffled forward. Even with his wrists bound, he managed to brace his shoulder against the wood and give a short, practised shove. The heavy piece slid a few inches along the floor with a low rasp. A trickle of cold air slipped from the gap behind. "There," he muttered hoarsely. Holmes and I drew the case farther aside. A narrow space in the stone wall appeared, no more than a man's breadth, black and deep. Holmes took a lamp, stooped, and reached in. For a moment he was motionless, then he straightened, holding a thin folio volume. It was, beyond doubt, the missing manuscript. Even to my untrained eye it was remarkable. Age-darkened vellum, delicate tooling, the edges of the pages faintly browned, a faded ribbon still marking some page within. Lord Thorndyke let out a long breath. "Is it unharmed?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Holmes turned a few leaves carefully, then handed the book to him. You may reassure yourself, my lord. It has been moved, but not damaged. Our friend here is at odds with the history of the volume, not with its contents." Thorndyke clutched the folio as though afraid it might be snatched away again. "Mr. Holmes, Later," Holmes said quietly. "There is something more important that you must see." He turned again to the recess. I watched his long fingers move slowly over the inner stone. Once before, I had seen him read a wall as another man might read a printed page. Presently his hand paused. "Just so," he murmured. He pressed on a tiny irregularity. There was a faint click, and the back of the recess yielded inward by a fraction. Lord Thorndyke stared. "What in heaven's name? That is an outside wall. There can be nothing beyond it." "An outside wall with a secret," Holmes replied. With some effort, we swung the hidden panel inward. Beyond lay a cramped, steeply descending passage, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The lamplight showed rough stone, worn smooth in places by long, vanished hands. "This," Holmes said, "is how your late father entered and left this room unseen. I have no doubt the other end opens into the study below. Hawkins, you've used it more than once. How did you come to know of it?" The valet lifted his head for the first time. "From Mr. Marsh, sir," he said, in a dull, flat tone. He'd been here years ago when Sir Percival and he were close. Sir Percival showed it him. After Mr. Marsh died, I found a plan among his papers with the passage marked. "And you always came this way?" "Yes, sir. From the study, up the stair, behind the bookcase. I never touched the lock. I left the door fastened, so folks would think none could enter without the key." Lestrade gave a short, astonished whistle. "So much for your miracle, Mr. Holmes. No spirits, only a hole in the wall." "In its physical aspect, the miracle is explained," Holmes said. "Your men searched the obvious avenues, locks, windows, footprints in the snow. The true entrance was one forgotten by the family and remembered by a man who felt himself outside it. He let the panel fall back into place with a soft thud. You will, of course, have this passage sealed, Lord Thorndyke. It has served too many purposes already." Thorndyke nodded. "At once. The idea of such a thing under my roof is intolerable." "Intolerable, but extremely convenient to those who knew of it," Holmes returned. He glanced at Lestrade. "You have ample grounds, Inspector, to charge Hawkins with the theft of the folio and the attempt upon the packet." "I'll see to it," Lestrade said grimly. "He'll answer for both." Hawkins sagged between the constables. "I've told you why I did it," he muttered. "Mr. Marsh was wronged. Sir Percival promised him that book, then broke his word. The old gentleman fretted over it till he died. I thought I'd make it right, for him and for myself." "You chose a dangerous way of righting an old wrong," Holmes answered, not unkindly. "The law will look at what you did, not what pushed you to it. Still, your confession has cleared one man of a very ugly suspicion." Markham, who had stood silent till then, drew a quick breath. "You are satisfied, then, that I had no part in this?" he asked. "In the taking of the folio, yes," Holmes said. "You have been used rather than using. Whether you have been equally candid in every matter touching this affair is a point on which I retain some doubt." A flush rose in Markham's face. "I have nothing whatever to hide." "That assurance is commoner than truth," Holmes remarked. His eyes, keen and momentary, passed over Markham and came to rest for an instant on Miss Finch. She stood very erect, gazing down at the sewing she had not resumed. He made a slight gesture. "You may remove your prisoner, Inspector. I shall need him again, but only to confirm certain hours and movements." Lestrade led Hawkins away. When the door closed behind them, the room seemed strangely larger and emptier, as though some oppressive presence had departed with the man. Holmes remained silent for a little while, his gaze travelling from the folio in Thorndyke's arms to the bookcase and then to the stout door that opened on the corridor. "There is one point, Watson, which I have no intention of leaving in obscurity," he said at last. "The maid found this door standing ajar at dawn, yet when Lord Thorndyke examined it, it was locked and bolted." "True," I said. "I had almost forgotten that small oddity." "I have not," said Holmes. "Nor have I forgotten the scarlet thread in the study. Nor who, besides yourself and myself, knew the contents of Lady Thorndyke's correspondence. Nor the exact moment at which surprise was first expressed at the existence of Mr. Marsh's letters. Hawkins is bold and patient, but he is not the man to design this entire scheme from the first." Thorndyke looked at him helplessly. "But surely, since you have the culprit—" "We have a culprit," Holmes interrupted gently. "The law is content when it can lay hands upon the instrument. My curiosity, as you know, lies rather with the mind that wielded it." He turned abruptly. "Come, Watson. I desire a word with Miss Finch in private. After that I shall be ready to place the whole of this business before you, from Marsh's first grievance to the last opening of this unlucky door." There was a certain finality in his tone which told me that in his own mind the case already stood complete. What remained was the ordering of events into that clear chain I had so often admired, and perhaps a last appeal to one troubled conscience in Thorndyke Manor that had not yet quite chosen between silence and confession. Holmes left the manuscript room without another word, and I followed him down the corridor. His stride was long and silent, almost severe, as though the last veil of the mystery had fallen away, and he now walked only toward its moral conclusion. At the end of the hallway he paused before the small morning room, where Miss Finch often spent her afternoons. A faint rustle within signalled her presence. Holmes knocked lightly. "Miss Finch," he called, "may we speak with you?" There was a brief, startled silence. Then her voice answered, calm but noticeably taut. "Yes, Mr. Holmes, please come in." We entered a modest room furnished with delicate chairs and a writing desk. Miss Finch stood by the window. The embroidery she had carried earlier lay untouched on a table. She did not sit. Instead, she turned to face us, her hands folded in front of her with rigid composure. Holmes closed the door behind us. "I shall be concise," he said. "You are aware that Hawkins has confessed to the theft of the folio." A faint tremor passed across her face. "Yes," she said. "But you also know," Holmes continued, "that he did not act alone." Her breath caught, though she did not move. Holmes took a slow step toward her. "A plot of this breadth," he said softly, "requires information Hawkins could not have gained from Marsh's letters alone. He knew of the secret passage, yes, but he did not know the present layout of Thorndyke Manor, nor the movements of its master. He could not have known that Lord Thorndyke, on the night of the theft, kept the key upon his person, nor could he have known of the letter packet's supposed dispatch, unless someone within this house made it known." She swallowed. "You're wrong, Mr. Holmes. Hawkins must have learned—" Holmes raised a hand. "No, Hawkins lacked both the subtlety and the confidence to manipulate events as they unfolded. On the contrary, someone guided him, someone who understood that Hawkins's loyalty to his dead master and resentment toward the Thorndyke family made him an eager instrument." Her lips tightened, yet she said nothing. Holmes's voice softened even further. "Miss Finch, you alone among the household had access to Lady Thorndyke's correspondence with Timothy Marsh. You alone handled those letters after her death. You alone saw in her writing the trace of an old grievance, perhaps even sympathy for Marsh's situation." "Sympathy," she whispered. Lady Thorndyke pitied him. She pitied many whom Sir Percival wronged. "And you inherited her pity," Holmes said. "You continued her compassion, perhaps even her bitterness, long after she was gone." Her eyes glistened, though she did not avert them. "Compassion is not a crime." "No," Holmes agreed. "But conspiracy is." A faint gasp escaped her, as though the word were a physical blow. "You told Hawkins of the hidden recess," Holmes went on. "And when the folio vanished, you were the first not to show surprise, merely fear. You saw me take the letters from the desk this morning. Your reaction then confirmed what I suspected. Hawkins was the hand, Miss Finch. You were the mind." Her entire posture stiffened. She gripped the back of the chair beside her. "I never touched the folio," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear it. I only told him where Sir Percival kept his secrets. I believed—" Her breath trembled. "I believed Marsh had been robbed, and I believed Hawkins."
"Might claim what should have been his master's." Holmes nodded gravely. "That is precisely what you believed, but the truth is more complicated. Marsh had indeed been wronged, but the folio was never promised outright. Sir Percival sought Marsh's expertise, yes, but he never intended to relinquish so valuable an heirloom. Their quarrel was bitter, but not binding." At that, Miss Finch pressed her hands to her mouth, as though to hold back a sob. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I only saw the anger in those letters. I thought, if Sir Percival cheated him once, perhaps Thorndyke might do so again. Hawkins worshipped Marsh. I thought I could help him." "And so you opened the study door the morning after the theft," Holmes said quietly, "to make it appear the room had been undisturbed since the father's death. But you forgot something. When the maid found the manuscript room door open, it stood ajar. When Lord Thorndyke reached it, it was closed and locked again. Only someone who heard the maid's cry could have gone ahead of her to shut it. Hawkins was not near that corridor at dawn, but you were." Miss Finch's hands fell to her sides, trembling. She turned away, bracing herself against the writing desk. "I intended no harm," she said. "I meant only to protect what had been wronged, to help Hawkins obtain justice." Holmes regarded her with neither triumph nor cruelty. "Justice cannot be summoned by clandestine means, Miss Finch. Marsh may have been wronged, but neither theft nor manipulation can rewrite the past." She drew a long, shaking breath. "What will happen to me?" Holmes looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he spoke in a tone weighted by complexity, neither entirely stern nor wholly forgiving. "That depends upon what remains in your conscience, Miss Finch. Hawkins will face the law, but your role is more subtle, more ambiguous. I imagine the authorities will see it as accessory to theft at the very least." A faint cry escaped her, and she sank onto the edge of the chair. Holmes continued, "However, I shall make my report accurately. Now, you did not touch the folio, you did not profit. You acted misguidedly from sentiment, not greed." Miss Finch bowed her head. "I will tell Lord Thorndyke. I cannot have you speak for me." "That," Holmes said, is wise." We left her then, a pale, fragile figure in the fading afternoon light. In the corridor, Holmes paused. "One sees, Watson, how the residue of old wrongs seeps through generations. The sins of Thorndyke past have borne fruit in the present." "It was not cold villainy," I said, "only misjudgment." "True," Holmes replied. "But misjudgment armed with knowledge is a more dangerous spirit than malice armed with none." We returned with Lestrade and Lord Thorndyke to the drawing-room. There Holmes delivered the whole explanation, with perfect clarity and without flourish. Hawkins's actions, Miss Finch's influence, the secret passage, the scarlet thread, the nocturnal visit.
It all unfolded like a chain whose links had been forged decades earlier. Lord Thorndyke listened in grief rather than anger. When Holmes finished, he said quietly, "I shall speak with Miss Finch. She will not live under my roof again, but neither shall I press for severity." Lestrade nodded reluctantly. "The law will settle Hawkins. The lady, well, we'll see what the magistrate makes of Mr. Holmes's account." Holmes sighed, not weariness, but completion. "That is all, then." Thorndyke extended his hand. "Mr. Holmes, I cannot thank you enough. You have restored more than a book tonight." Holmes inclined his head modestly. "I restore nothing, my lord. I merely reveal. Restoration belongs to those who remain." Later, as we prepared to depart, Holmes stepped out onto the manor's front steps. Fog drifted over the fields. A single lamp flickered in the stable lane. "Holmes," I said softly, "you look troubled." He smiled faintly. "Only thoughtful, Watson. I have always said that the most profound mysteries lie not in locked rooms, but in human hearts. This case merely proves it again." He drew his coat closer. "Come, we have a late train to catch. London will seem almost cheerful after Thorndyke Manor." And with that, we stepped into the swirling fog, leaving behind a house whose long-hidden secrets had at last risen and settled, like dust transformed by the morning light. The train rocked gently as we left the dim outline of Thorndyke Manor behind, its high chimneys swallowed by the evening fog. Holmes sat opposite me in the compartment, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze distant yet calm, the expression he wore only at the conclusion of a case that had met the full measure of his intellectual appetite. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels seemed to provide its own sort of reflective music. At last, Holmes stirred, his eyes sharpening with the return of the present moment. "You are unusually quiet, Watson," he said. "Not discomposed, I trust." "On the contrary," I replied, "I was merely absorbing the many tangled threads of this affair. It is rare that a mystery springs from motives so intertwined: loyalty, misjudgment, old grudges, and inherited responsibilities. Even you seemed, if I may say so, moved by it." Holmes's lips curved in a faint smile. "Ah, Watson, when sentiment intrudes, it is the detective's task to observe without becoming ensnared. Yet I confess there was a certain melancholy to this case, for no true villainy lay at its heart. Only unresolved debts of the past, and hearts guided more by wounded affection than reason." "You saw Miss Finch's part long before the rest of us," I said. "Yet you waited." "I waited," Holmes replied, "because the pattern of the crime was incomplete. Hawkins's role was obvious once the secret passage was revealed, but the instigator, the invisible hand, required a gentler form of deduction. A pressure too early applied might have driven her to desperate falsehoods. As it was, she was ready to accept the truth. And Lord Thorndyke? He behaved with more dignity than I expected, Holmes said. A lesser man might have lashed out, but he saw that the roots of the mischief lay in his father's conduct, not merely in the actions of those who sought to correct it. His leniency may prevent a tragedy from deepening into something irreparable. I nodded, reflecting on the fragile figure of Miss Finch, her composure nearly shattered beneath the weight of her confession. "And what of Hawkins?" I asked. Holmes's expression became philosophical. "Hawkins is a man shaped by long service and long resentment. In him, loyalty and grievance formed a potent alloy. He acted out of devotion to a dead master whose anger he had made his own. The law must take its course, but he is no street criminal, Watson. His fate will likely be tempered by his motives, misguided though they were." We sat in silence for a moment more, the compartment dim and warm. But tell me, Holmes, I said, was there any moment when the mystery truly puzzled you? Holmes chuckled softly. My dear fellow, of course, the most troubling detail, the door that opened yesterday, teased me from the start. The open door with the key still in the master's pocket, that was the hinge of the entire affair. When a thing appears impossible, it is rarely the laws of nature that err, but rather our assumptions about them. Once I discarded the belief that the door had been the point of entry, everything else fell into place. The passage? Yes, Holmes said. The passage, the thread, the scratch marks, the rug disturbed by draught, each was a note. Together they formed the tune. And once I suspected the passage, I looked not only for the one who used it, but for the one who knew it existed. I leaned forward. It was the scarlet scarf described by the maid that first made you suspect Hawkins, wasn't it? Partly, Holmes said. His hands were the true tell, neat, pale, uncalloused, the hands of a valet, not of a gardener or a lurking prowler. And when he spoke of Marsh, I heard the tone of a man who carried another's grievances like his own. But Hawkins alone was not enough. The early morning locking of the door, that was the touch of a careful mind, not a desperate one. That belonged to Miss Finch. Holmes inclined his head. Her intent was to shield Hawkins, and perhaps herself, from immediate suspicion. A natural impulse, but a revealing one. She overcorrected. Few people in a household rise so early, Watson, and the ones who do seldom take pains to tidy a crime they do not understand. So in the end, I said slowly, the crime was the product of two hearts, one loyal to a dead man, the other loyal to a living memory. Holmes gave a soft, approving nod. Well put. The train slowed as it approached London, the city lights flickering like embers through the mist. Holmes drew his coat around him and leaned back with a sigh that was not fatigue, but a curious kind of release. Every case, he said, leaves its mark. Some impress themselves with violence, others with cunning. But this one, Watson, this one was a quiet tragedy, a house haunted not by ghosts but by the lingering consequences of unspoken wounds. He tapped his fingertips together. Yet even quiet tragedies must be resolved. And so it is, I said. Your reasoning has, as ever, restored order where confusion reigned. He waved the compliment aside with a characteristic flick of his hand. Come, Watson. The night is young and the fog will be thick upon Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson will have the fire ready, and I dare say our next visitor will not keep us waiting long. And what makes you think that? Holmes reached into his pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope which he had taken from the Thorndyke correspondence. Upon the front was written in a firm, elegant hand, to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Baker Street. Private. Holmes smiled. Thorndyke's solicitor slipped this to me as we departed, a request for my attention on an entirely unrelated matter. You see, Watson, doors open every day, not merely yesterday. The train pulled into the station, steam billowing in the cold night air. Holmes rose, straightened his coat, and gave me that familiar, keen expression, the one that always carried us forward from one mystery to the next. Shall we? Together we stepped out into the London fog, the case of the door that opened yesterday, sealed behind us like a book returned to its shelf. Its secrets laid bare, its lessons quietly lingering, and its place in my chronicles forever assured.